Welcome once again to bringing joy back to teaching and learning with a Gameful classroom. This is part 2, and I'm still Katrine Becker. So last time we covered a little bit of my background and how I got to where I am now. This part is going to dive into my 4 C's of Gameful learning, which were inspired by Rygaluth, as we found out last time. Once we're done with that, we will talk about the implications of what I am proposing, and then take a look at some examples of how this actually gets applied. So, fasten your seatbelts for part 2. And here they are. The first one is criterion-based. The second one is cumulative, and I mean strictly cumulative. The third one is competence-based, and the fourth one is choice-affirming. I will get into each one of those in more detail, and I will explain what I mean by each of them. When I'm trying to make sense of some new concepts and fit them together to form some sort of coherent whole, I find it helpful for me to organize things in a kind of a graphic way. I realize that this doesn't work for everyone. There are some people that have real difficulty with these kinds of visualizations, and other people look at them and go, aha. So take it or leave it. This is the one that I am using as it works for me. This image represents my 4 C's of Gameful learning. The first C is criterion-based instruction. So forget norm. I actually don't care how students compare against each other. Well, that's not entirely true. I have taught introductory programming in a computer science department for approximately 40 years, and probably taught more than 10,000 students in that time. So I have a pretty good idea about what's easy, what's hard, and what typically works. However, I also know that each student is an individual. Right? Let me offer you 2 examples. 2 of my very brightest students that I came across in that 40 years. One of them went on to earn his Ph.D. at Stanford in computer science. The other one quit school 6 weeks before the end of his 4th year to go and be a drummer on a cruise ship. Both of them very bright, very, very different people. But students like those 2 have helped to remind me that they are all individuals. So when we set up criterion-based instruction, that means that we are setting our bar independent of the norm. But we still have to remain cognizant of what's reasonable and what's doable. So in this case, the image here is an example of the kind of criterion that I set up for one of the assignments that my students do. And the questions that I ask myself are, what am I looking for in a solution? How will I recognize when I have a reasonable solution? And I'm looking for good enough. I'm not looking for superb necessarily. Now, once I've set up my rules, and I give them to my students, and I always give my students the grading criteria before they start their assignment. Once it's set up, stick to your rules. Keep it simple. If, when, because you inevitably will, you discover that you missed something, or you described something badly, or you thought you could ask for something that turns out you couldn't, then revise. But don't do that to the current batch of students. You can explain what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can make minor changes, but don't make any major changes. If they've already started the work, don't start changing the rules on them in the middle of things. So that's what we're doing with criterion-based instruction. The second C is about cumulative scoring. Now, admit it or not, almost all students come in thinking they have an A, and then everything they do after that is compared against the A that they're supposed to have. One difference here, though, unlike games, everything the student does for points adds to the total. This allows for the potential of continuous progress that is never really punitive. So nothing the learner does lowers their grade. Rebellion aside, it's additive rather than compartmentalized. Compartmentalized is what we have been doing and what we almost always still do in our classes. We have a certain number of percentages that go for assignments, a certain number for the midterm, a certain number for the final. And the thing is, if a student blows one portion, one compartment, they may have screwed their chance of passing the score. I've had people who have, talked to me, other students who have talked to me, and what they say is that they stopped coming to class because at some point they realized there was nothing they could do to bring their score up to a passing grade because they had missed or screwed up one crucial piece. And it seems to me that it really is no measure of the student's ability. It is penalizing them for one thing they messed up. So, if we have everything be additive, that always allows them the opportunity to recover from things that they've messed up. If they try and do an assignment, let's say it's worth 30 points, and they get the wrong idea, and all you can do is find 5 points to give them on this assignment, that's 5 points more than they had before they handed it in. They still have to do other things to make up the score, but they still haven't actually lost anything but time, and what they did during that time was probably learn something. So it's not a waste. That is the idea behind cumulative scoring, is that everything they do adds to the score, and it is not compartmentalized. And I will come to how that works later on. Briefly then, here's how cumulative scoring works overall. At some point, I realized, since we're in formal education, we have to be able to map the scores that we give our students in class onto the letter grades or percentages that are required by the institution. The chart on the right is the mapping that I have chosen. The mapping of letter grades to percentages is one that is prescribed by my institution. And so, according to their regulations, anything over 95% and over is worth an A+. For simplicity, I decided that I would use experience points with a maximum, ostensible maximum, at 1,000. That way, it's not math that you have to do to figure it out, it's merely arithmetic. The students can tell what their score is at any given point in the course. When they first start earning scores, you can see the little display down in the lower left. It's really kind of depressing to see the grade, the letter grade being an F and an F and an F and an F. If you look on the chart on the right, you'll see that they don't get out of F territory until they pass 50%. So rather than nag them about still having an F, I changed it so that so far reads as not yet. And the actual percent they have is both of those things are grayed out to sort of de-emphasize them when they're looking at their score. The one in the middle, you can see that this student has submitted a fair number of things. The last update for their score in this case is in September. So we're still in the beginning of that semester. However, this particular student has a score of 796, so they have submitted enough things and they have been assessed on those things, and their total so far is 796. They are at level 10. Some people like to know what level they're at. Other people don't actually care. I like the color coding because it helps people see easily where they stand. Their grade at this point, 796 out of 1,000, makes it 80%. And according to the university mapping, that gives them a B+. Now, according to the rules of this game, i.e. my class, they can walk away once they have achieved the grade they want. So if this particular student, the one in the middle, is content with a B+, they can stop coming to class. They are finished. Like I said, part of this deal is that grades will never be taken away. Points are never taken away. If you have 796 points, if you have 80% in the class, you have 80%. If you walk away now, you still have 80%. And that is one of the things that is a huge game changer. There is no downside to this. There is no penalty for not finishing things if you have already earned the score that you want. My responsibility as an instructor and as the instructional designer is to ensure that when they have earned that score, they have in fact demonstrated that they are competent, that they have mastered the material sufficiently to actually earn a B+. That part is my responsibility. Their part is simply doing the work and earning the points, which in the process, they will learn the material and they will master the skills that they have to do in order to achieve those points in the first place. The third C is about competence, and that is the notion of attainment rather than time-based progression through material. The image is one of a fairly bog-standard kind of course outline. It lists week by week the topics that are going to be covered, the chapters in the book that are related to that, and when we're going to have tests and various other things. Now, the assignments are due at a particular time, and once the assignment is handed in, as is typical for most courses, the student hands it in and immediately starts working on the next one, or at least starts thinking about the next one. Same thing with once we are finished with a topic, we tend to just go on to the next thing. Attainment-based is a different kind of idea. Competence-based progression allows for as much time to be spent on a particular thing as is practically possible to do in the confines of a course. And students are allowed to work on these things until they get them to the point where they're happy with them. On the bottom right-hand side is an example of the kind of requirements that are laid out for a particular kind of assignment. This one is one of my achievement quests. This one I'm calling my profiling mission. And it lays out in general terms what they have to do in order to get the points and how much each of those parts is worth. Now, this isn't quite like a rubric. Part of the problem with rubrics is in order to be able to lay them out properly, you need to have a large amount of data, that is, people who have done that particular piece of work, enough of them that you can describe well what not good enough, and excellent looks like. In my case, what I am doing is I'm simply using what amounts to a Likert scale from 0 to 5, and often, if it's good enough, they get the marks. We're talking 5 points. 5 points out of 1,000 is 0.5%. So we're not talking an awful lot of points here, but they know before they hand the assignment in, before they even start working on it, what I'm going to be looking for, how I'm going to be scoring them. Now, in my case, they are also, and this is another part of the time piece, allowed to resubmit assignments. If they don't get the score they want, they are then allowed to fix it and return it and have me mark it again. After all, my goal is that they learn how to do this, not that I have yet another opportunity to slap my students for messing up. And finally, we get to the choice part. None of the rest of this really has that much impact without this absolutely crucial piece. This one is the absolute game changer. The idea is they are told they have to earn a certain number of experience points. A perfect score is 1,000 points. If all they want to do is get their A+, that's 950 points because they need, according to my institution, 95%. So there's that. They have to earn that many points. I am giving them M different things that they can do to earn those points. And if they were to do all of them, and if they were to get a perfect score on every one of them, it would total much more than the 1,000 points they need in order to get a perfect score. So there's the difference. My part, again, as the instructor, as the instructional designer, is to ensure that however they wend their way through this course, whatever pieces they choose to do, they will end up getting enough experience, becoming competent enough, earning and acquiring the mastery that they need in order to pass the course. So my part is to define the rules of this game in the sense that I will say these parts of this are crucial. You have to do these. You have to do 2 out of 5 of these. You have to do this one to a particular level of competence. The rest, how you make up the rest of the score, completely up to you. I've laid out the rules. Go ahead and game the system, if you will. I'd like to take a minute or two to just look at the usual kind of scenario. What I've pictured here is a fairly standard kind of course, total 100%. There are 5 different assignments, each worth 6%. There's a midterm worth 30% and a final worth 40%. And let's suppose that a particular student ends up earning 25% on the assignments, and as you can see here by the colors filled in, they did pretty well on all but one. They blew one, but the other 4 they did quite well. They earned 25 out of 30% of the midterm, and on the final they did not very well. They got 15 out of the 40%. Now when you add those percentages all together, that ends up being a C. Now why is that a C? If you take a look at the work that the student did over the course of the term, they did that quite well. The midterm, they also did quite well. There's 100 different scenarios that could be used to explain what happened for this person on the final. Broke up with their significant other. They got ill. Family emergency. They lost track of what was going on. There were a couple of things in the second half of the course that they just didn't understand and didn't have time to figure out. So there's a whole lot of possibilities for why they didn't make that last little bit that really have very little to do with the student's actual abilities. Now contrast what you just saw with this picture. This one allows for a great deal of choice. In this case, imagine that every square represents 5 experience points. If you count along the bottom, there are 10 squares in each row. So each row represents 50 XP. The job of the student is to fill this grid by completing various quests and earning experience points until they've reached the level, that is the letter grade, that they want. So they just fill in the blocks as they go along. I have overlaid some minimal requirements that they absolutely have to do in order to pass the course, and I make it quite clear to them that these are absolute requirements. You don't do this, doesn't matter how many points you have, you're not getting through. I've never had a problem with anyone not being able to meet the minimum requirements. So in this case, I've sort of colored in a little bit those blocks that make up their minimal requirements. And as you can see, if they complete the minimal requirements, they will pass, just barely. And if they're content with that, that's their choice. Part of the choice is being able to choose to be mediocre if that's what you want. And here is what a B might look like. A B is 750 points, and you can see they've filled in enough of these things. They've done 4 achievement quests. Those are the blocks in orange. They got 300 points for their epic quest, which is the blue part, and did a variety of mini quests that are worth anything from 5 to 20 points. If they're content with that, they are now finished. And there you have it. These are my 4 C's of gameful learning. Nothing is based in time. Everything is criterion referenced. All of the scores are cumulative. They are scored based on their own competence and not compared against other students, and they are given a great deal of choice over which things to do, how to do them, how often, and when to hand them in. Next up, part 3, where we'll take a look at the implications of this kind of a setup, both from the perspective of the instructor and from the perspective of the students.